You know, every single company out there, from your local coffee shop to a giant multinational, has to answer one huge question. How do we pay for all this stuff? Whether it's a new factory or a big research project, it all comes down to a really tricky balancing act. So, let's get into it.
And at the heart of that whole funding question is an even bigger one. Is borrowing money, taking on debt, a smart tool to juice your growth and make the owners rich? Or is it a dangerous trap just waiting to spring, one that can bring even the most solid companies to their knees?
This is the core of what finance folks call capital structure. It's really just the choice every business has to make between using debt, which is just borrowed money, and equity, which is money from the owners themselves. And believe me, getting this mix right is one of the most critical decisions a company will ever make.
Okay, so let's start with the most intuitive, kind of old school way of looking at this whole problem. For the longest time, the thinking was pretty simple. Hey, debt is cheaper than equity, so using more of it must make the company more valuable, right?
This table here really just nails how powerful that idea seems. Take a look. Let's say an owner puts in $1,000 and gets a 20% return. Pretty good. But now, what if they borrow an extra $3,000 at 10% interest? Whoa, their net benefit just skyrockets, and their return on equity, or ROE, leaps from 20% all the way up to a massive 50%. So the whole point of this traditional view is that debt is basically a lever. It just magnifies the returns for the owners. As long as the business is making more money on its projects than it's paying out in interest, the shareholders get to pocket all of that extra cash. I mean, it seems like a total no-brainer. But then, everything changed. Back in the 1950s, two economists, Franco Modigliani and Merton Miller, came along and just completely flipped this idea on its head. And their work was so revolutionary, it literally won them a Nobel Prize. Okay, so here's the core of what they argued. They said, hey, let's just imagine a perfect little bubble for a second. No taxes, no fees to buy or sell stock, everybody knows everything. In that perfect world, they said, it makes absolutely zero difference how a company pays for things. 100% owner's money, 50% debt. Doesn't matter. The value of the company is exactly the same. And this brings us to their famous pizza theorem, which is just a brilliant way to think about it. The company's total value, that's the whole pizza. The capital structure, that's just how you slice it. If you give a bigger slice to the lenders who hold the debt, that just means there's a smaller slice left for the owners. You can slice it up any way you want, but you can't make the pizza any bigger just by cutting it differently. So you're probably asking, how does that work? Well, here's the big catch that the old view completely missed. Yeah, debt is cheaper because it's safer for the lender. But when you add debt, you concentrate all of the business risk onto the shareholders. Their slice of the pizza becomes way, way riskier. So to take on that extra risk, they demand a higher return. And what Modigliani and Miller proved is that in a perfect market, this extra cost for the equity part perfectly cancels out the benefit of the cheaper debt. The result? The company's total cost of capital, that WACC you see on the slide, it stays completely flat. It's a wash.
Okay, so that's all great in a perfect theoretical world. But we don't live in that world, do we? So let's start bringing this back to reality. And the first big assumption we gotta break is a huge one: taxes. And this is where things get really practical really fast. Most governments around the world give companies a pretty sweet deal. They let them deduct the interest they pay on debt as a business expense before they figure out their tax bill. But the dividends they pay to shareholders, nope, you can't deduct those. This creates a massive, very real incentive to use debt, and it's called the tax shield. Let's be super clear about what's happening here. For every dollar a company pays in interest, it saves some portion of that dollar in taxes. This isn't magic, it's a direct transfer of value. It's money that would have gone to the government, but now it gets to stay with the company's investors instead. And this seems to lead to a pretty simple conclusion. A company should pile on as much debt as humanly possible. But of course they don't. You just don't see healthy companies running on 99% debt. So why not? Well, because there's another powerful force pushing back in the exact opposite direction: the fear of not being able to pay that money back. And this is what we call financial distress. Now, it's not just about the legal fees you'd pay in an actual bankruptcy. The really damaging part is all the bad stuff that happens to the business just because people, your customers, your suppliers, your best employees, start to worry that you might go under. These hidden costs, they're the real killers. I mean, think about it. Would you buy a new car from a company if you thought it might go bankrupt next year? Who would honor the warranty?
Think about a company like Sears in its final years. Suppliers started demanding cash up front. Customers got nervous. The best employees saw the writing on the wall and left. And management got so distracted trying to keep the bankers happy that they stopped focusing on, actually running the business well. All of this just destroys a company from the inside out.
And here's the most important part. This damage doesn't wait for the company to actually miss a payment. No way. It starts the moment the market just starts to worry. The mere possibility of a default creates this terrible ripple effect that can grind a company's day-to-day operations to a halt, destroying value little by little every single day. So now we have it, the two big opposing forces that really define how we think about capital structure today. Let's see how they slam into each other in the real world. So on one side, you have that very clear, very tempting tax shield that's pushing you to take on more and more debt. But on the other side, you have the growing, scary, and hard to measure costs of financial distress that are pushing you to be careful. The whole game is to find that perfect sweet spot where the benefit of taking on one more dollar of debt is exactly canceled out by the cost.
There's an analogy for this in the source material, and it is absolutely perfect. Adding debt is like walking closer to the edge of a cliff. The tax benefits give you a better and better view, so it's really tempting to take just one more step. But if you take one step too far, the fall isn't just a little bad, it's catastrophic.
So how do managers actually make this call in the real world? Well, since those costs of financial distress are so hard to pin down, there's no magic formula. It's really more of an art than a science. What they do is look at what their competitors are doing, they figure out what level of debt will let them keep a good credit rating, and they build in a safety buffer, just to make sure they stay well away from that cliff edge, even if they have a really bad year.
And all of this leaves us with the ultimate question. The next time you look at a company's financial statements and see they have very little debt, are they being smart and prudent, protecting the business from risk? Or are they being too cautious, giving up that valuable tax shield, and basically leaving millions of dollars on the table that should be going to their shareholders? And that, right there, is the capital structure balancing act.